George A. James here. We're looking at caloric, expenditure, misconceptions. I want to start off with a brief story. I'm going to take the view of the camera here in just a few seconds. Good afternoon. I have some information behind me here that I'm going to present and share with you in just a little bit. But I want to open with a little story. Several years back, I was talking to a lady at a commercial gym, and I believe she was just on the treadmill or elliptical, one of those two machines. And she mentioned to me that she was just working in the fat burning zone. What exactly does that mean? Basically, she was saying what many people say, what many people have read. You exercise for 20 minutes or more, preferably longer than 20 minutes, perhaps 40 or 60. And by doing so, at a steady state, about 50% of max VO2. When I say VO2, I'm talking about the body's ability to receive oxygen to the working muscles during an exercise session. So we're talking about a medium intensity exercise session for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and even longer than that, perhaps an hour, sometimes even more. By doing this, fat is the prominent fuel source. And this is correct, this is true. To my right here, I have a chart here, and maybe we can zoom in just a little bit here if possible. I have two sources here at the bottom. Revisiting Energy Systems, May 2002, Sports and Exercise Nutrition, 1999. As you can see, there is research, there's scientific evidence that backs up the numbers here. Is it always 100% right on the money? No, it is not. But the numbers here are fairly accurate according to research and scientific data. So notice here the macronutrient on my left side here, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. This is the expenditure of calories at various intensities. We have rest, low intensity, moderate, and high intensity. So basically, as you can see, and hopefully this is a good view for you, 55% here, fat is the prominent source. Moderate intensity, 55% of calories expended for energy for a moderate intensity exercise session are coming from fat. But I want you to pay close attention to this chart. There's something here quite interesting. Take a close look. Hopefully you're able to see this clearly. And if you look at fat here and you look at rest, you notice that it's 60%. So here's the question. Here's the question for you. This is accurate information as far as we know from scientific research as far as how calories are expended and the percentage of the macronutrient of those calories, the percentage of the macronutrient from the calories expended during these various intensity levels. 60% from fat. So the question here is this. Is it then a good idea to just sit on the couch and eat popcorn and watch television and expect to burn optimal amounts of body fat to get healthier? Instinctively, logically, intuitively, I hope you realize, from a common sense standpoint, I hope you realize the answer is, of course, no, it is not. There's more to the story than what we have here. I'm going to try to convey this in a way that it adds clarity, in a way that simplifies things. Here's a key point. Yes, moderate intensity does primarily use fat as fuel. But here's a takeaway point you must keep in mind. What happens after the exercise session is very critical. And this is what most people either have not learned or read or studied or have been taught. And it is this. Here's a key takeaway point. One of the key takeaway points. After an exercise session, you're exercising for 20 minutes or more on a consistent basis, 3, 4, 5 days a week. And this is done week after week, month after month, and a year passes, 2 years pass. What happens is this human organism has innate wisdom built into it. And it realizes that fat is a key fuel source. So when we eat food, we begin to store more fat, because that is the brilliant design of the human form and organism. It knows it needs more fat, so we get fatter by the exercise that we choose to do. This may sound very contradictory to some, but there are many others that know what I'm talking about. But even still, you go to a commercial gym, you'll see people, I've seen people on a regular basis, and their body composition never changes, and all they're doing primarily is sitting on the stationary bike, reading a magazine, watching television for 40, 60 minutes. This is elliptical, treadmill, other types of aerobic endurance type of machines, which don't always have to be aerobic type workouts necessarily. But all exercise does have its place. I'm not necessarily knocking aerobic endurance or aerobic exercise completely. But I want to register with you that exercise must be varied. And if you're doing only slow twitch muscle fiber activity, you should not expect drastic, transforming results for your body. Again, let's reiterate. Long duration activity teaches the body to store more fat. I've heard a cardiologist say that the real magic happens after the exercise session. I agree with that to a point. I don't agree with it 100% because there's still things happening with the body while we're exercising too, of course. But I do understand his point in that the great metabolic changes result afterwards. There's still perspiration. There's still changes in heart rate. There's adaptations to connective tissue with various forms of exercise. So there's still things happening as we're exercising. But yes, metabolically speaking, the real magic happens after the exercise session. And I believe that's what this particular cardiologist was referring to. So I do agree with that point. Our bodies change after the training session, but there's still some things that happen during the exercise session too that are important as well. Don't want to go in that direction too far at this point, but it does bear repeating that or sharing that to some extent. So, what I also want to touch base with you is this. Something else to keep in mind. You probably have heard someone say, well, I have been doing this amount of exercise for a long period of time, and now I'm getting fat, and I was never getting fat before. What is happening here? So something else to think about. Metabolism is changing. It changes as we age. It changes over time, over the course of one's life. So just doing the same thing, expecting always the same results, may not happen in this example, in this particular example. That's why the body does respond very well to variety and change. We want to incorporate type 1 muscle fibers, but also type 2A and type 2B, which are the fast twitch fibers. Now, type 2A fibers have characteristics of both slow and fast fibers. So keep that in mind. And training all those fibers will produce better results, a more resilient body. Something else I do want to share is, here's a question that comes up. You may see someone at the gym and they look to be reasonably fit. Their body composition looks reasonably healthy, and they're not drastically obese. Oftentimes, in many examples, in many cases, I've done body composition, body fat checks with calipers on people like this. And they're doing elliptical only or treadmill only. And what often happens is this, and it's surprising to me a little bit, or was surprising to me. It was a little surprising to the individual and maybe surprising to you as well. The body fat is higher. It's higher than you might expect. It may be 22%, 24%, 26%. Not morbidly obese, but still going in that direction. It's a higher body fat, even with someone who is very active. But I'm referring to people, again, I'm referring to examples where it's only aerobic activity, only long distance activity, and the other exercise modalities are limited or are neglected altogether. People like this do keep a reasonable body composition as far as their body weight is concerned. But what happens is this, because they're not developing muscle, they're not building muscle, they're doing long duration activity, muscle is being used as fuel for their activity. They have a softness to their physique. They're a little chunky, although their body weight is reasonable. They have a softness to their physique though, because of the type of activity they choose to do and the type of activities they neglect to perform. Now you might ask this challenging question. You might consider this. We just had the Olympic Games this year. We didn't have them in 2020, we had them in 2021. We saw there examples of elite endurance athletes, swimmers, runners, cyclists. We know about the Tour de France cycling event, the great, grueling bike event in Paris, France. Or over in France, I think it's more than just Paris, France, but over in France, the Tour de France. And you may note that the physiques of these elite cyclists are very lean. You could also look to marathon runners and say, well, look at them, George, look how skinny they are. Likewise, the endurance swimmers and the 1,500 meter runners, the 5,000 and 10,000 meter runners, male and female. Someone could make an argument, look how skinny they are. Key takeaway point here once again, please listen. Pay attention, think about this, please. Those elite endurance athletes at the Olympic Games and Tour de France events, consider this. How fast do you think they're moving? They're not like the slowpokes. Sorry if I sound offensive, but they're not like the slowpokes that go to commercial gyms and sit there and stand there on the treadmill, moving along at a nice, easy pace, watching television for 60 minutes. They're moving fast. So what does that tell us? Although the event is endurance, the energy system is primarily oxidative energy system, which is aerobic in nature. If you have 4 or 5 marathon runners bunched up for the last mile of the marathon, what do you see happen? They make a break, a sprint to the finish as best they can, and they've just run 25 plus miles. So they're utilizing not just the slow twitch fibers, which are not conducive to good muscle development or strong muscle development, but they're also using type 2A and maybe even some type 2B fibers, which are the explosive fibers. By doing that, they have some wiry muscularity to their physiques, However, it is true that they're very thin, and they're not developed like a sprinter would be, a 100 or 200 meter athlete would be. They're much skinnier, and in many cases, in many examples, they're also burning muscle as part of their fuel for that long duration grueling event they're taking part in. But please realize that yes, we're comparing apples to oranges. Commercial gym endurance training, very different from an elite endurance athlete. Very, very different. The pace is different, the speed and intensity is much different, and their training is varied as well, where they're incorporating more muscle fiber tissue, not just a slow muscle fiber tissue only. Again, to reiterate, which is not conducive to the slow twitch fiber, the type 1 fiber that is, not conducive to the building of skeletal muscle tissue, which is a key for enhancing metabolism, the metabolic rate. Now, what's also key that I just mentioned there is the intensity. Another takeaway point is intensity. Intensity matters. It matters for everyone. We're not all going to be elite endurance athletes or elite athletes of any sort perhaps, but we can at least do our best and challenge ourselves intelligently, and challenge ourselves in an intelligent fashion that allows us to produce better results, become healthier, stronger, more vibrant. I want to show these next two charts here. We'll try to get maybe a little close up here if we can, or just an adjustment with the camera if I may, to look at this chart and then this one here as I wrap this up. This chart here basically is pretty simple for clarification purposes. In my book coming out, Fitness Through the Eyes of the Heart, I have a little more intricate of an example in my book which shows how one would train with intervals and how the formula here would be altered for that. But for our purposes here right now, I believe this will suffice. Basically, I just have two examples. We have one person, the individual is working at 50% of max VO2 at the top, then 70% of max VO2 here. So 50% here, 70% here. This here is the information on the individual, the body weight, and then a conversion formula here. So I'll try to, for clarification, for clarity, my words might be a little bit bunched up here, but hopefully I'll try to point a few things out and it comes across in a reasonable and logical manner for the viewer. So 30-minute duration is the workout here in this example. As you take note here, we have the VO2 max here and the body weight in kilograms, okay? Pounds and kilograms. We're going to use kilograms for the formula. And then we have the conversion milliliters to liters here. So we get the information here and bring it into a formula. We have the max VO2 times body weight in kilograms. That gives us this number here divided by 1,000. Now here that comes out to about 2.9 liters. And I say here, let's say about 3 liters. Here's a key point to keep in mind, very important here. 1 liter of O2, that's oxygen, equals about 5 calories burned. So if we're breathing harder, if we're getting in a state that's consuming more oxygen, we're going to burn more calories. So remain mindful of that. So here we have the 50% of the person, 50% of the person's max VO2, and I've got 1.5 liters there. I got the 1.5 just from the 3 liters. I just round that up just for simplification, just for simplicity. And I got 1.5 liters of O2 per minute. And then I do this formula here, the 1.5 liters times the 5.0. Why the 5.0? That's the 5 calories burned per 1 liter of oxygen. That's where I got that number, just so you know, okay? Times 30, that brings us to approximately 225 total calories expended. Now, this was a moderate intensity. What did we learn earlier with this chart here? It's about 50-55% calories expended from fat. Okay? So, we had 225 total calories for that workout. 50% of 225 takes us to 112.5. And that gives us calories expended from fat. Now take a look at this, please. Take a look at this very closely. The next example here, 70% of the subject's max VO2. So I've got here 2.1. I just did 0.70, 70% multiplied into the 3 liters to get the 2.1, okay? So here, we're going to have 2.1 times the 5.0 times 30 minutes. That takes us to 315 total calories expended. So we're working at a higher intensity, a higher max VO2. There's greater caloric expenditure. Now this becomes a little more interesting with interval training, and I have an example of that in the book as I mentioned. But here, we have 40% only. So not as many calories are utilized from the macronutrient fat. Not as many calories utilized here, just 40%. So it's less than the example above. But take a look at what happens. 40% of 315 takes us to 126 calories expended from fat. So when we train harder, when we add intensity, we ultimately burn more calories. And by doing so, we burn more fat in the process. So stay mindful of that. Intensity does matter. Intensity matters. And although the percentage of the lower intensity of a percentage of calories utilized for fat as energy is higher in the lower intensity than it is with the higher intensity of training, because we burn more calories, that does equate to more fat being utilized as well. Again, 112.5, 126. You might think, well, that's not a big difference. However, think of this. Think of over the course of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. At that point, it becomes a very big difference over the course of time. Finally, I want to take you to this right here. This is Epoch, and there has been a lot of research on this, especially in the last 15 or 20 years. And the Epoch, the EPOC, that signifies excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Now in this chart here, I do want to share this. This is important. How this happens is different for everyone. There's always the principle of individuality. We're all different. We're not all going to respond exactly the same way. But here, I have the graph here. The blue line represents oxygen, and then the red represents exercise intensity. Okay? So here I'm at rest. Okay? And could we just move the camera just a little, just tilt just a little bit this way, if we could, please, just for everyone to get a good shot at this. Just a little bit. I just want to adjust the camera here for a moment. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we're just looking at this chart here right now. Right here, I want you to notice, and I'm not sure if you can see the color, but the red signifies the intensity, and we have rest here. Now we start to work out. Okay? Now at this stage here of the exercise session, again, realize this is different for everyone, because I know you're going to have questions on this, or someone will have questions for sure. This is the elevation of intensity, and what's happening here is this. I have O2, or oxygen debt. Why is there an oxygen debt right here? So the blue line is the oxygen. It's lower than the exercise intensity at this point. Why? What's happening is the body is getting acclimated. It's adjusting to the exercise. For some people, this could be a very short segment, depending on the ability, depending on the athletic ability or the training intensity that the person is used to doing. and their conditioning level. So if it's a fitness enthusiast, a serious fitness enthusiast, this may be a very small oxygen debt period. For someone just getting started, it can be much larger. But here's what's happening though too. The respiratory system and cardiovascular systems, they haven't caught up yet to the body in motion. So the body's adjusting, the body's getting acclimated. These systems of the body are getting acclimated. And just to reiterate, for everyone, this is going to be a little bit different. But what's happening is the body's getting acclimated to the exercise. Additionally, anaerobic energy is being used at first. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that is a molecule that gives us energy at the cellular level, and it gives us energy for roughly 2 minutes. So roughly 2 minutes, we're getting that energy source from the ATP. After that, we're getting energy from glycogen, stores in the muscle, for roughly 15 minutes. 20 minutes and beyond, as mentioned earlier, fat is the prominent energy source. And this workout can be varied. It can be moderate intensity, it can be a interval routine, it could be various types of exercise, various types of running or performance of exercise. We can even throw in various forms of circuit training, and also peripheral heart action, which is another segment of circuit type training, which can include weight training, kettlebells, as well as being on a Stairmaster or elliptical or treadmill for a short, brief period of time, but moving at a pretty reasonable pace. So the exercise here could be a wide variety of things. But we have that oxygen debt. First energy system is anaerobic energy pathway that's used first, producing lactic acid. Now, during the session, the body gets accustomed to the intensity, and we're getting adequate oxygen for the muscles. So this represents the adequate oxygen for the muscles, and then the exercise intensity diminishes, and we come back into a state of rest. Now here is the Epoch Effect. Here's the Epoch Effect right here. There's a surplus of oxygen consumption after the training session. After the training session, there's a surplus of oxygen consumption. So in essence, metabolism is being enhanced even after the workout. Supposedly, in the morning, there's a greater effect than if you were to do it mid-afternoon or later in the day. Now, this oxygen surplus is happening because there's a resaturation to the muscles and the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and there's also a breakdown of lactic acid that is occurring too. I have seen one researcher make mention of this. He said that the Epoch Effect is greater for higher intensity exercise than it is for lower intensity. I do agree with that. He has also mentioned that after the exercise session, there might be 25 calories burned at rest, as opposed to 30 to 70 with the higher intensity exercise. He also went on to say that this isn't a great difference. And I agree with him to some extent, but here's something else that we should be mindful of. And I mentioned this a little earlier too. During the course of time, do you think that 30 to 70 caloric expenditure for the Epoch Effect is going to make a big difference compared to the 25 calories caloric expenditure in the Epoch Effect after a moderate intensity exercise? Do you think that's going to matter over the course of 3 to 6 months? Of course it will. Something else that is extremely significant. Remember, who are we talking about? Who's the athlete? Who's doing the workout? Who's doing the exercise session? If it's an elite athlete, do you think the Epoch Effect is going to be greater for that individual than it is for the average individual? Of course, absolutely. So we must consider that too. There's always the principle of individuality. We don't all respond differently. Some of us are elite athletes or performers in various sports and activities, and some of us are not. On average, yes, it's probably true the Epoch Effect may not be enormous, moderate intensity compared to higher intensity training or interval training of some kind. But even still, over the course of time, if we're burning more calories, that can produce better results for our body composition over time. So please consider the intensity. Intensity does matter for all of us. I'm not saying be so intense that you hurt yourself. Train intelligently. But as a cardiologist I know of down in the state of Florida, he has a nice way of putting this. He says you go to exercise and you see where you are. The next session, next time you exercise, push yourself just a little bit more, not much. Don't drain yourself. Just push yourself just a little bit more, and you try to continue to build and build upon that. So, adding to it. Now, this chart here, I do want to add this in closing. Oftentimes, it's considered only for moderate intensity activity or endurance type athletes. But we know from research that higher intensity activity, whether it's interval training of various sorts on the track or high intensity workouts with kettlebells, they can have a great effect here with caloric expenditure even at rest. The greater athlete we are, or the more we're able to push, the better the results here for caloric expenditure. But we do it logically, intelligently, and within reason. This is George A. James, and thanks for joining me with this segment of Misconceptions and Caloric Expenditure. Hopefully this gives everyone a better idea on how to burn more calories effectively and burn more fat. If you have questions on anything I shared, please post them and I'll be happy to address them as best I can. George A. James, I'll see you soon. Have a blessed day. Peace.